Hello, everyone. Welcome to Dan Paulson. Again, I apologize for not being able to do this version live for you earlier today. Unfortunately, technology got a little bit ahead of us, and we were unable to actually perform the session. So I'm going to record it here and allow you to view it. So you'll get all the benefit minus the question and answer part. If you do have any questions after viewing this, please feel free to reach out to me. I will include my contact information at the end. And I encourage you that if there's anything you need help with, by all means, feel free to reach out. So let's start it here. I am going to get the PowerPoint playing. And here we go. So setting yourself up for success for the coming year. As you know, there are many changes going on out there. Fortunately, many of the companies I'm talking with are doing quite well right now, with the exception of a few issues, mostly related to employment. So employment is still a problem. They are seeing a few changes as far as orders coming in. There's a little bit more up and down with that. So we're definitely seeing a time where there's some transition or change going on. Uh, there's a lot that's in our control. There's also a lot more that's out of our control. And the whole point of putting this together was to provide you with a tool that as you go into your planning for 2023, you will have something that you can use. And I designed this with the intent that this would be something that I could use myself. I wanted it to be simple enough that I could go through and analyze my own business. And I wanted you also to have the opportunity to do that as well. So the nice part is, whether you're a small company of 1 to 2 employees, or whether you are a large organization of several hundred or even several thousand employees, this is something that you can use and is a good barometer for developing what you are going to work on in your planning session for the coming year. Now, what I will say with this is it isn't an end-all be-all. This is just a tool to help you in the process. What I hope it will do for you is it will help you streamline your process and get you focused on some core areas of your business and allow you to then break down and analyze what you need to do and then start putting together a prioritization schedule for getting those objectives done. So we're going to spend a little bit of time today talking about this. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on everything because you'll be getting a copy of the 70-point inspection for you to use for yourself. And there will be a dashboard template attached to that you can use. It covers, I believe, a lot of the major chunks that you will want to review on a regular basis. We'll talk about how to use that in the future. Please understand, though, that every business is unique. And I can take two widget builders that are producing almost the exact same thing, and there are still many variable differences in their business that they have to watch out for. So while there might be things in here that you say, well, that doesn't really apply to me, or this seems to be missing, please understand that that is something that you can adjust or change with this. So the idea here is this is just to give you an overall feel of how your organization is doing and what areas you need to look at to improve along the way. So that's why I wanted to make this as a simple tool that covers 70 different points in 5 different categories within your business. So what we'll cover today is the impact of that planning, of why planning is important. We're not going to spend a lot of time on that. If you're here, you all already understand the value of that. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about what actually happens when we go into planning. We believe we're going to get one outcome, often though we get another. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. From there, I'm going to go into the 70-point tune-up and break that down and show you the different components of that and explain a little bit about how you might use that. Again, whether you're a small organization or whether you're a large organization, also some things to watch out for as far as how you use it that might impact the outcome for you. The last part is interpreting that data. So we'll look at how we then take that information and process it, especially if you have a core leadership team that you're working with and they're going to be actively involved in this process. We want to make sure that you're getting the right information out of it. And most importantly, looking at the right things first, and the right things that you're looking at might surprise you when we talk about that later on. And then how we simplify the process, because it's very easy when you go into this looking for all the things that are broken and all the things that need to be fixed and create this huge master list of stuff to do. And I will tell you right now, in most cases, that stuff will probably never get done. So there's a way to break it down to work on most important things first. We'll talk a little bit more about that later on. So first, let's touch on the impact of planning. As you may know, as you probably are aware of, which is if you're listening to this, I'm sure you do, in planning is an important part of business. If you are going to grow and you are going to grow methodically, this is something you need to do. Many companies just kind of wing it. They go through the year and do some quick setup for the following year. And especially when times are good and things are busy and more than enough work's coming in, it's very easy to just kind of let it coast and let whatever happens happen. The problem you run into, though, is if you don't plan for those times when that business slows down or when there's changes, kind of like what's going on right now, we can run into situations where you're not prepared for the sudden shift that takes place. The idea of planning is to actually get ahead of those, be proactive, and start looking forward, looking to the future, and figuring out how you are going to adapt to the potential changes coming ahead. Now, none of us have a crystal ball. None of us can read into the future. If we could, or if I could, gosh, that would lead to me buying an island and living out there whenever I feel like doing it. But the problem is we can only predict so much, and we've got to kind of read the tea leaves as far as what's happening right now and what we think might cause those changes in the future and how we prepare for that. That might be changes again economically, it might be changes with our competition, it might be changes with the needs of our customers, it might even be changes in how we're going about selling or innovating our products. There's a lot of different things that go on in a business that need to be tracked and managed. And even in a smaller business, that can be a challenge as well. Often it is more of a challenge because you have fewer resources to work on it with. And often, again, as the business gets smaller, the more the owner is doing. So this will hopefully allow you to build a system and put something in place that'll get more people engaged in the process. It's a great way to motivate your people because people do want to look ahead. They want to be part of something bigger. And when you create a plan, especially anything like a strategic plan, that is about creating something bigger than you currently are now. And the idea behind that is to get the creative juices flowing, look at where there's opportunities, and figure out how to capitalize on those opportunities. Getting your leadership team excited about that. But most importantly, if you communicate this effectively, it's also getting your team, your employees excited about this as well. So keep that in mind as you're working through this. How do you engage every part of your company into the overall success in the future and enroll them in the process? It's also great for identifying those blind spots. Many of you have done a SWOT, strategic strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. You're probably familiar with that term. If you've done one of those, then you've essentially, that's what you're looking for. You're looking for those areas of opportunity that maybe you weren't aware of. You're also looking for those areas of weakness where you need to improve. And then you're looking for how those strengths and opportunities are going to play on each other. It's also a great way to discover how you differentiate your business. As I said, there's many companies out there that produce similar items like services. Well, what's important is aligning with your ideal customer and with those who are going to value you the most. The way to do that is differentiation. Making sure that when you're talking about whether you're a real estate agent, whether you're a manufacturer, whether you're in healthcare, say a dentist or a specialist of some type, that people understand what really makes you unique and what makes you different. Now, there are things that you're going to do that are going to align with some people and are not going to align with others, and that's okay. The important thing is we want to know really how we align with our target audience and making sure that the services and the products that we offer are going to best fit their needs so that they will ultimately choose us when they make that purchase. Because as the economy shifts, as we see people starting to hold back, people are going to hold that dollar closer and make very conscious decisions on where they spend it. They want the biggest return possible for the money because that money has now gotten a lot more expensive to use. So they've got to make a wise decision. You want to make sure that wise decision is you. Now, I talked about the benefits of planning, and obviously, if you're listening to this, you see benefits to planning. There are many companies that do planning on a regular basis. And while they understand it's important, they also tend to fall into a very similar pattern. And I see this time and time again. I've done lots of planning sessions for companies. I've been involved in planning sessions in some of the companies I've worked with in the past. And I can tell you, planning can take anywhere from a couple hours to several months to put together. And it seems like larger corporations with more moving parts, they want to do the full planning session. They often start in August or September to have a plan wrapped up sometime in later November, early December to launch in January. Smaller companies, you might sit down for dinner one night and write it out on a napkin and away you go. But what we need to do is we need to make sure the plan is actionable. And that's often where I see things fall off the rails is plans are not actionable. Sufficient time is spent on a plan. A lot of people spend working on a plan, but then when it comes to actually getting the plan out and making sure it's done, that's where things fall apart. So we make plans. I tell people they're often sold by weight. It's a 3-ring binder. It's several hundred pages. It's every little detail that you talked about over the time you did the planning session, but there really isn't much that's designed to hit the ground running right away. And that's really where I want you to look at as we do this part of the process, what's going to make the difference. Creating that book, setting it on a shelf, and forgetting about it is not an effective planning strategy. Yet you wouldn't realize how often that happens. All the work is done, and then people go back to their normal routine. Planning is about change. It's about making change in your organization. It's about making change in your people. And sometimes it's even about making change in your culture. So we need to make sure that when we are putting together a plan, we're making sure it's nimble, it's efficient, it's effective, and it's getting done. And that doesn't involve a huge book of War and Peace where every little detail is covered, is focusing on what's most important first. So let me talk about the 70-point inspection or the 70-point tune-up. This was a document that I put together. I looked at several different categories of business or of your business and said, okay, well, if I was looking at this category, for example, what you see on here, culture, what were the things I would need to check? And because I'm a car guy and where I got this idea from is, you go get your oil change, you go to the dealer or you go to the Jiffy Lube, if you will, and they do their inspection. So it's not only are you getting the oil change, they're topping the fluids off, they're checking the brakes, they're checking the tires, they're checking the suspension, they're checking a number of different components on the car because they want to make sure it's working right. Now, most importantly for them, they see that as a sales opportunity. So if the tread is low on your tires, for example, not only will you go in for an oil change, you might be ordering a new set of tires. Or if the brakes need replacing, they might go ahead and replace the brake pads or the rotors or whatever needs to be addressed. This is kind of along the same approach. So you get that sheet from the dealer, from the oil change place, and you see all the different things that they checked, and often it's a red, yellow, or green. Red needs replacement. It requires immediate action, or it is in the worst condition. Yellow is, this is something we need to watch, and green is everything's okay. Well, I took the same approach here. So I broke this down in several different categories. I made several different statements, and based off those statements, I'm asking you as the owner or as your leadership team to rate each one of those. Green means everything's going good. That's a strength. That's something we're doing extremely well. We're firing on all cylinders there. Yellow is an area that we know we could improve. We might need to improve it. Maybe there's some level of importance to it, but it's not in any dire condition. Red, just like if your brakes are wore out and they check the red box and that needs replacing, the red areas are areas that also need to be looked at for the sake of addressing some of these critical issues or determining if these critical issues do need to be addressed. So that's how I broke it down here, which means that in the way this form is laid out, it's basically 2 pages front and back. You can go through and check the boxes in fairly quick order. So like on the last slide, it's broken down into several different sections, culture being one. And you'll see there's several questions here, several statements that I'm asking you to check red, yellow, or green on. Do we have a clearly defined culture? Are our values widely known? All these questions are going to give you a subjective impulse, and I'm going to ask you to check one of those boxes. So based off of how you fill this out, It gives you a good feel, again, a good barometer of where you see your strengths and where you see maybe some opportunities for improvement. So culture being one. The next one is financial. And financial is obviously important because if we're not making enough in sales, we're not making enough in profits, it's going to be hard to sustain the business. So there's several questions here that I would have you fill out and give yourself an honest answer of how you feel you're doing. If you are a sole business owner, if you're the only one doing this is a good checklist for you to really check in and see how you're doing on your own business and where you want to invest your time as you go into the new year. If you are a larger organization, one of the things I would ask you to do is really work on this as part of your planning session with your leadership team. This might be something that they would fill out ahead of time and then bring into the first part of the planning session to kind of open up that dialogue or open up that discussion. That's really what this is all about. I thought about, could you give this to your employees? And I would say you really need to look at your culture and your staff and say, okay, will they provide us with an honest answer? And to what lens will they look at these answers through? My recommendation would be you augment this slightly for your staff to really focus or ask things in a way that's going to give you the answers you are looking for or the answers you need. And what I mean by that is these are all written in statements. And again, it's a subjective point of view from the leadership team as far as where they would rate it, red, yellow, or green. Well, an employee might look at things differently than the leadership team does. And we also want them to look at things in a positive and productive way. It's not that we don't want to uncover where there's pitfalls or where there's challenges or where things aren't working, but we want to ask them in a way where we're going to solve the problem, not uncover a multitude of problems that we may never solve. So look at how these questions or how these statements are asked and see if there might be some adjustment. If you have any questions about that or want to talk with me, I can talk you through maybe some different ways to look at this if you were going to share this with your team. Part of this is also looking at staffing. So again, if an employee was looking at this, they might look at it from their perspective. Leaders should look at it from their perspective as well. But each part really wants to look at things, at an individual level. And there's going to be some things in here that hopefully you'll record as a green. There's going to be some things that might be red. There's probably going to be a number of things that are going to kind of fall in the middle. And we'll talk a little bit about how to handle those later on. Operations. A lot of boxes to check here. So operations is how the business functions, how procedures are handled, all important things to address. Sales is going to pair up with the next one, which is marketing. And this is really, again, how your sales process works. And you'll see some questions in here that kind of intertwine these two categories, because your sales and marketing should work in conjunction with each other. They're separate, but they need each other to really work and function to be successful. So as you look through these questions, you should look at it again in each lens and see how one affects the other. So that really covers all the different sections that you need to address. And like I said, it'll be on 2 sheets of paper. You'd fill it out. You would talk about it with your team. But what's also important is making sure you interpret the data the right way. And when you're interpreting the data, there's a common fallacy that most people do first. And I would ask you, where do you put your attention? Well, my guess is most of you are going to focus on your weaknesses. I'm asking you to focus on your strengths. And that's where things really matter, because your strengths are already something you're doing extremely well. And you want to be able to utilize your strengths as leverage to fix the things that need to be fixed. But that is also how you differentiate yourself. You want to make sure that when you're doing this, you ask yourself the question is, how do my strengths apply to my future growth? Are my strengths in the areas that I need them to be, or do I need to develop new strengths that will move us in the direction we want to go? Maybe you're doing a new product or new service. Maybe that you're using new materials that you've never used before, which means there's a learning curve in it all. It requires us to look at the strengths first and see how that aligns with our future direction. Next, we look at the weaknesses. So now we switched from looking at what's in the green column to over what's in the red column. And we want to look at those as, and again, apply it in the same way. How do we utilize our strengths to offset our weaknesses? Is there a way to do that? Do the two intertwine in some way? Do your weaknesses matter? That seems like a silly question. You'd think, well, Dan, you listed all these categories in here. I would think that every line matters in my business. And I would still challenge you, ask yourself those questions, because there's some things that they may be a weakness, but maybe they don't apply based on how you're doing what you're doing. That's a question you have to ask yourself. That's a question you have to ask your leadership team, because ultimately you can't work on everything. And you see the image of the plane here. I forgot to talk about that. I'll back up a little bit. So back in World War II, the U.S. Army, well, the Air Force was looking for ways to improve the viability of their planes. They were flying over Germany. They were getting riddled with bullets, and many of them were getting shot down. And anyway, they were looking at the planes, and they wanted to analyze the data, see how they could affect keeping more planes in the air, making sure fewer planes fell out of the sky. And they were working with the statistician, and this is what they pulled up. So this is an example of one of how they plotted out their data of the planes that came back and where the bullet holes were and how many they were. And if you can see, a lot of damage happened out on the wings, especially out on the far end. A lot of damage happened in the center of the plane, and a lot of damage happened in the tail. And the first inkling was, well, that's the areas we need to reinforce. And the statistician that was working on this said, no, these are the planes that came back. So when you look at this, we're able to analyze these data points because these planes survived. What we need to look at is where the damage occurred that we have no data points on. And if you look at this, most of the damage that there's no signs of was around both engines and around the fuselage, the center cabin. So those were the areas that they then decided to invest their time and their money and reinforce. And that what that allowed to do was the planes were able to take on more damage because the key areas that needed reinforcement got it. If they had reinforced the outsides of the wings, the tail, the middle section of the plane, they wouldn't have made a difference. There was still been just as many planes being shot down. So that's an example of why it's so important to look at this data and see where it matters. Read between the lines. And how does all this differentiate you? That's the last thing I leave you with, because the good, the bad, the ugly all makes up your company, your culture, who you're about. So next we want to simplify. There's a lot of information here. If you look at that, again, there's 70 different points that are talked about in that tune-up sheet. We want to be working on what's most important first. The idea here is anytime you're doing planning, you need to boil it down to, I would say, no more than 3 to 5 objectives. And this, again, is looking at the top level of the organization. We want to make sure that everything we're working on is manageable. If we have 20 different objectives, you're going to have 20 different things that never get done. I would say even 5 gets rather difficult because you have 5 different core areas that you're working on. It's better, in my opinion, to narrow it down to 3. Now, there's different ways to handle this. You can break these down to different departments or divisions, but ultimately, everything that each department division does should roll up into the top 3 to 5 objectives that you have in the organization. As I mentioned, there's 70 different points I'm covering. You might say, well, Dan, there's so many things here that when I look at the list and when I go through this, I really need to work on. Where do I start? And the simplest process that I've ever come up with, or that was ever actually shared with me, is something that you're very familiar with once a year. And if you think about March Madness, boys basketball, men's basketball, women's basketball, whichever basketball you prefer for college, they go through a bracketing system. So they start with 64 teams. Actually, I think it's 70 teams, and then they break it down to that list of 64. And then that list keeps getting smaller, halved as you go forward. So let's say you have 10 different objectives that you want to work on. Well, What I would do is pit one objective against another, and you keep prioritizing. So one's got to win. There can never be a tie. One has to win. That one then moves on to the next bracket, which now has half as many in it, and then so on and so forth. And that gets you down to your number one. Pull your number one out, repeat the process again. That gets you your number two and your number three. And that's really where you start. And that's the same to be true for each action item, each task, getting that to the most top level priority being acted on first. So first in, that's what you're going to address. That's what you're going to deal with. Select an owner for that. So you as the business owner might not be the best person to be handling that. In some cases, you might not have any other choice. In most cases, though, you do. Even if you don't have employees, you have other ways to outsource and get help. And that's what I encourage you here is this isn't going to, again, provide all the answers and all the solutions internally. Sometimes what it's going to do is going to provide you the opportunity to ask questions or find needs that you might need to seek outside help to fulfill. Keep that in mind as you're doing this. If there's something that you can't get done internally, you don't have enough resources or enough people, you have to figure out how to get it done, especially if you put it as a top priority item. So it's going to require investment. It's going to require outside resources. You got to figure out how you're going to get it done. Then you set sprints. And what I mean by that is you want that objective or that project broken down into smaller, more manageable chunks that you can review regularly for progress. So often we set a goal, we set that goal for the end of the year, and then things get in the way. You know, it's not a priority in January when you know you got 12 months. However, it does become a huge priority in November when you only have a few weeks left. Well, by then it might be too late. So let's make sure that we're taking those projects and breaking down in smaller, more manageable chunks that typically can be done in a few weeks, no more than a few months. The way we do that is, again, take the bigger project, break it down into smaller steps, prioritize where those steps go in the process. And then you assign your owner of it. That owner then assigns who's going to be working on it as far as their team, and they set the deadlines and objectives that they're going to meet in that process. In those shorter windows, you can look at something every couple weeks and see if you're making progress forward. That to me is key if you're going to be successful in completing your plan. And review it regularly. And the best way to do that, again, is to roll everything into what's called a dashboard. Now, you've heard of different types of dashboards out there. I've created one here. This is a single page right now, just one-sided. And again, much of what's on here is probably important for you to review. There might be some extra things that you want to add. And I left the back page blank. And if you need help coming up with how you lay that out or how you keep track of that, that's wonderful. I'm happy to help you do that. This is the area that you're going to compile all this information you get in your planning process and be able to track it and see how you're doing. So for example, if you were using this sheet once a month, you could review and see how you're tracking on everything from your sales to your profits to your pipeline. What are your primary objectives? Like I said, 3 to 5. I give you spot for 5 here. What action items you're working on in this time period. So what we also want to talk about is our SMART goals. Our SMART goals are specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time constrained. We want to make sure that we're including that here because these are the steps we're going to take. These are the goals we're going to work on in the time period we've allotted. This is kind of our sprint section. The last one is performance indicators. And what I want you to look at here are 2 different things. Most of us are very good at finding the lagging indicators. Our balance sheet, our P&L, for example, are lagging indicators. Stuff has already happened, and this is the outcome of all that stuff that's happened. I want you to be more focused on the inputs that are creating those outcomes. So we need to find the leading indicators. What's being plugged into the beginning? What actions are being taken that produce the desired outcomes that we're creating? And that's where this is measured and tracked. Who's doing it, what they're doing, and what the outcome is. So that really nails down our dashboard. Like I said, this is going to cover probably 80% of what most organizations would use. However, there might be some other details or data that you want to track, and that's good too. Give yourself some space to do that. Customize this so it fits your organization beyond what the standard template is. Now, if we were meeting, I would say, here's the time to ask questions. Instead, what I'm going to say is feel free to contact me. If you have any questions, reach out to me. You can go to Dan Paulson Let's Go. There's an opportunity to fill out a form there. You can reach me at dan@envisionbusinessdevelopment.com. Contact me directly there, and I'll be happy to answer any question you have. You also have my phone number here, so you can give me a call if there's something you need. Beyond that, I wish you the best as you plan for 2023. Remember, you always have somebody out there who's willing to help you. If you got any questions, feel free to contact me. Until then, have a great time and best of luck to your future.